after this lesson, you'll be able to identify which exact metrics should be mapped to each stage of the lifecycle journey. And we'll show you how to identify each of these for your particular app. So here we have a table of example metrics to track. And you'll remember this table from earlier on in the course. These are our 4 core lifecycle stages. And for each lifecycle stage, there's a different metric that makes sense to track to ensure that you're moving users from one stage to the next. So for potential, these are free users that are showing interest, but they've not yet subscribed. We want to be looking at the paywall view percentage, the trial start percentage, the trial to paid percentage, and the install to paid percentage. And I want to re-emphasize the first point. The paywall view is so important because if you realize that, a low percentage of users that onboard and come into your product are actually seeing a paywall, then you're never going to get users to convert. We need that paywall and that upsell moment to be visible for users to understand that there is a paid product. For active and paying users, these, again, to remind you, these are users that are getting value and they're using the product over time. We want to be tracking the time to the first core action after upgrade. So if, for example, we see that it's taking longer than a full day for somebody to meditate for the first time in our meditation example, that could indicate that it really isn't that easy for users to find the meditation packs and to know how to get started. Secondly, we want to look at the percentage of subscribers that are completing the primary job to be done. So in a meditation app, again, if users are downloading to become more mindfulness, they're downloading to become meditators. If there's hardly anybody that's meditating after they've subscribed, again, that shows you that there's some issue with the core product and the value proposition. And then, as we talked about throughout the course, we want to be looking at the frequency of how often a user is actually performing this, and how accurate that frequency is, depending on the type of product that you have. So, for example, in our period tracking example, if users are only logging data once every 3 months, then that means that there's an issue with the core function of the app, right? Because people are not doing what they're supposed to do or what they've signed up to do. And then we also want to be tracking renewal rates here. So, this goes back to the point we made about lifecycle marketing does not stop at the point of conversion. So we want to be making sure that users are renewing over time. And if you see that hardly anybody makes it past the first month renewal or past the first year renewal, for example, again, it signals that they're not getting the value that you've promised them out of the product. So let's look at drifting. There's quite a few here. So we want to be looking at, for example, the days since they last used the product. Is it a normal cadence, what we would expect with the natural frequency? Or is there like huge gaps, and that would signal that these users are not getting the value they once were? Is there an increased time in between sessions? For example, for a streaming product or app, if somebody was, binge watching a series every single day, and now all of a sudden they come back to the product once a month, that could also indicate that there's an issue with the content. And is there like a drop in advanced or premium feature usage, which signals that they're really likely to churn in an upcoming billing cycle? And then for churned users, we want to be looking at the cancellation reasons. We then want to be looking at the churn rate. So we imply this by the renewal rate. Are people actually, renewing? Are they getting that value over time? Or are they just paying once and that's it? And we want to be looking at the average subscription length after win back as well. So are we winning back users? And then, if we win back a previous user that was on the annual plan, when they come back, are they just spending like a month or even a week on those plans and then churning? Or are we actually able to get them back onto the annual plan? And then we, of course, want to be tracking the net revenue after these discounts or incentives that we're sending to make sure that it makes sense from a business perspective. So let's look together at what success should look like for your individual app. Revenue Cat has a really nice tool online, which is called the App Health Calculator. And what you can do is you can access this tool and input your current metrics to this tool. And then what it will do when you click calculate is it will show you where your individual metrics sit compared to competitors and peers in the same industry or the same vertical. And this can be really handy because it gives you a snapshot of where you're doing really, really well versus where you really need to work on. And that can also help you to understand how to prioritize your initiatives in lifecycle marketing. Another thing that I would encourage you to do, besides looking at benchmark, is to regularly review your product funnels. If you have product analytics, one thing I would encourage you to do is to build funnels for each of the key stages of your app or product. A really good example is your onboarding funnel. So map your key events in your product analytics tool to understand how your product funnel is performing. A really good example in health and fitness apps, sometimes there are a lot of questions as part of the onboarding. If we see, for example, that users get 3 questions in and then they drop off and they never reach the paywall or the end of onboarding, then that's a really good signal that we need to optimize the onboarding experience, either through the product or through lifecycle messaging, to encourage people to come back and complete those questions and complete the onboarding experience. And a really good tactic to do that is to reinforce why these questions are really important. For example, to personalize the user experience or show a plan that makes sense for that user. And another thing that I'd encourage you to do regularly is to look at your product funnels. So if you have a product analytics tool, what I would encourage you to do is map the key events in each funnel. For example, your onboarding funnel. And if you see that there are large drop-offs in that funnel, that can also be a signal that this is one of the first places that you need to work in terms of lifecycle messaging and bringing people back to the product to ensure they complete the onboarding experience. So now let's do a practical exercise where we're going to review the performance of your app against other apps in your category. Welcome to the next practical exercise where we will review the performance of your app against category peers. This exercise will help you see which benchmarks your app is already on par with and where the greatest opportunities are. Once you have this data, you will have a rough idea which lifecycle journeys to focus on first. First of all, access the RevenueCat Health Check Calculator by clicking on this link here. Once you're here, you can first select which category your app sits in. So we'll stick with our health and fitness meditation app as an example. Then what you want to do is you want to input your real world metrics into each of these boxes here. I've just left these here as an example for you to see how it should be done. If you don't have a specific metric, but you still want to carry on with the exercise, feel free to leave each of these boxes blank or just input an example value. Once you've added all of your own metrics, click Calculate. And what will happen is you will receive a score based on how you're doing overall. And later down, this will be broken down into the percentile rank and also the key metrics versus industry benchmarks. And you can save each of these images and charts.